Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1458. So to sum up what we're learning, he's explaining the verse in Shir HaShirim, Shcheira Ani V'Nova. I am dark and beautiful. I saw some of the translations translated, I'm swarthy and comely. But I think dark is probably the better word to use here, because talking about the darkness and the concealment of the soul as it comes down below and manifests within a body and an animal soul. And the soul is declaring that statement, but qualifying that though I am darkened by this state, this lower state of consciousness, however, Venava, I want to say comely, beautiful, because that very darkness elicits and draws out from the soul a profound, intense love and desire and longing to connect. That's what distance does. That's what darkness does. The context of why is he explaining this began on page 1455, because he's speaking about the soul as it comes down below and what happens in this world. There's the soul as it's rooted in its original root, which is even higher than angels and higher than Torah and higher than all levels. But that's how it is in its root. Then the soul, however, travels and descends. And that etzem neshama, that core state, becomes concealed as the soul goes downward. And that's why the soul needs the support of the malachim, of the angels, as well as of Torah and so on. Like he gave the example back on page 1454, and really the operative example over the last, I would say, good 100 pages, which is all about the eye. That the eye, even though the core power of vision in the soul has no limits and doesn't need any support, but once the physical eye, the vision goes into the eye, there, without light, you can't see in the dark. So though it's the very eye that sees, but the eye needs a light to shine so the eye can then use its power of vision and actualize it. So the same thing is here. The neshama fundamentally has the power to see the divine and to experience godliness. But since it comes into a dark world, Shcheirani, as he explains, that's why it needs to have the light to help it see. But once it sees, it itself sees. And that's why the neshama itself can say, Shcheirani, though I'm dark, I am beautiful. It's not because of the angels or any other force. The soul itself sees. And on the contrary, because of the darkness, like he explained, that the pupil of the eye, which is what is called Ishen Einai, that is the very darkness of the eye that allows the eye to see. So it's from the darkness that allows us to see. That's how he explained this on page 1455. And that became the context, the flow, what's B'nai Yerushalayim, because remember the souls below are speaking to the souls as they are in Atzilus, which are called the daughters of Yerushalayim. That's the state of Yerushalayim. Utter devotion, utter reverence, total yira, reverence of the God, total, like he called bittul b'mitzias. But that's the way it's in Atzilus. However, when the neshama comes down below into biyah, that's where the shcheirani is applied, and yet something is achieved that even though the soul says, I don't have shleimus hayira, like you, B'nai Yerushalayim, have, but I have something even more. I have the thirst and the longing that comes because of the darkness. That sums up more or less the last few pages that we spoke about. So Malchus of Atzilus, in the state of Ibur, when the soul is connected, just like a fetus is connected to its mother, then it experiences the oneness of the connection with Elikus, with the divine. Like the fetus is completely feeding off and is connected with and united with its source. But once the soul comes into biyah, So firstly, there's the birth of the souls, and then it descends further down. Then it assumes Shcheirani, and there, as explained on the page we're on now, on the top of page 1458, there it's darkened, and yet it's beautiful or comely because of that very darkness draws out its deep thirst and intense longing to connect to godliness. That's up till the paragraph, the middle paragraph on page 1458. Just to put this in broader context, this is all obviously the central theme of Ayin Beis, the interface between us and God, between existence and the divine, and on both levels, both connecting the immanent, the divine as it manifests within existence on our terms, connecting with the transcendent elements that are completely beyond existence. That's the central interface, and that's been essentially the theme as well in volume 3 on different levels, as he's been speaking first from the bottom up, that even from the distress we come, from the darkness we come to the point of experiencing the divine essence of Helam Atzmi, and Mamay Lamata through Torah that reveals it going forward, going downward, the light that helps us access it in the darkness. So you have here both sides. You call that length. The big part of the second half of Ayin Beis, volume 2, was the two ways that we interface. Which is through tefillah, that from the bottom up, we transform the tzimtzum, and we come to experience higher states of consciousness all the way pre-tzimtzum, and then bring it downward from Mamay Lamata through Torah, where we bring transcendence into existence, Torah. And here you have it coming together right now as we discuss. Because on one hand, the soul is in a darkened state, and yet it also yearns and longs, but it has the support of Torah and Oyer and the power and the resources that the Malachim, the angels, give us that allow the eye to see. So you see both sides going on here at the same time. You have the effort from below, but you also have the support from above. So it's coming together, both interpretations, even though he hasn't spelled it out, and I don't know if he will, because the Hemshech ends before he really brings them together, but I'm spelling it out myself here because that is really the central theme, the overarching theme of Ayin Beis, going back all the way from volume 1, where he actually started speaking about these two different ways of interfacing between divine and existence. Okay. Now I want to sum up what we learned the last class, which we went, this is paragraph, the middle paragraph on page 1458. And we'll go a little slower because on the last class, I went quicker, but I went at a faster pace. So I want to sum up, and you'll see how it literally connects to everything we're discussing right now. So just keep in mind this, and let's make it very practical. The struggle of life that each of us has in trying to find direction and guidance and purpose and transcendence and connecting to what is our calling is a challenging one because we live in a dark world. The Shcheirani is the story of each of our lives. Every one of us encounters that darkness one way or another, sometimes more intense, less intense. So at the same time, we have resources to deal with this darkness. In addition to what I just mentioned, we have Torah. We have Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the community, the eyes of the nation are our leaders. We have the Malachim, as discussed at length in the previous parts of this, the previous pages. We also have the Neshama itself, has its root. We don't come alone. The Neshama itself has tremendous power. However, it needs to be activated. It needs to be triggered. Needs to be ignited. Just like the power of the eye. The eye has the power to see. Even if it's in a totally dark room, the eye does not lose its power to see. However, it needs work to be able to see. It needs an outside light, and then it needs, of course, the eye itself has to be open and be able to have that vision. So the same is true with the darkness of life. Okay. And that's a Shcheirani V'nova, and on the contrary, we've added that the darkness itself, the concealment, the distance, that itself is a catalyst that helps propel the soul to deeper states of intense passion and yearning and longing, which, as we see, that absence makes the heart fonder, so to speak. Same thing here, shcheirani v'nova. Okay. Now, he brought, at the end of the last paragraph, to bring some examples, he brought verses that capture this idea. The verse of Mizmor LeDavid, which says, B'yoseh b'midbar Yehuda, that David sings the song when he was in the Judean wilderness, Midbar. So the Midbar is what brings out the song. Like he says, Tzomelecha nafshi, like he continues. What does he say? Tzomelecha nafshi ki be'eretz tziyah v'oyef bli moyim. That my soul is thirst to you because I'm in a parched and arid land without water. So we see from this that the Midbar itself, the wilderness, is what brings out the deeper thirst. So in the next paragraph, he explains that. He brings a few. I'm going to bring a few sources to drive that point home. And then I want to add another point that I want to but I'll emphasize that afterwards. So he brings from Medrash Rabbah on the pasuk Shcheir Ani V'Nova in Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. So he brings there Shcheir Ani B'Midbar, V'Nova Ani B'Midbar. That both the wilderness is talking about the Jewish people who were, when they traveled in the wilderness 40 years. So on one hand, it darkened them, it challenged them, but they also beautified them. Because that's where, and it continues on, the Medrash continues to talk about all the great things that happened to the Jews in the Midbar, the receiving of the Torah, and all the things how that refined them, that elevated them, to the point that he says, the pasuk says, Mi zeis Eila min Midbar. That's also Shir HaShirim. Who is this? The one that elevates, Eila, that arrives from the Midbar, and the Medrash says, Kol iluv min Midbar. What's the word Oila? Oila means an aliyah. From where? From the Midbar. Because all the Elohim, and he enumerates a whole bunch of them. I counted, I think, maybe 5 or 10 tremendous qualities that the Jewish people acquired while from the Midbar. So what we see here is exactly this point, that the Midbar, despite it being on one hand a darker place, is what also brought out these Elohim, these qualities and these virtues in the people. Okay. Now to explain this, he explains that Midbar comes also from the word Dibur. Midbar is like Medaber, Midbar, Dibur. What's the connection? Because but the real meaning behind the Midbar is, whether it's both sides of it, the darkness of the Midbar, and also the beauty of that comes from it, is that we're talking about the Dvar Hashem, the words of God that create existence. Now, these words can be revealed, then we're not in the Midbar. That's not a wilderness. In a wilderness, the words of God are concealed. Basically, the divine energy within existence is concealed, like he says. Dvar Hashem, that energizes, which is coming from Malchus of Atzilus. Like we learned before, the souls, Bnei Yerushalayim, come from Malchus of Atzilus. But then they descend into Biyah. So he says that this is called Dibur Elyon. It's also called Eretz, land, because land is also the level of Daimim. Earth is Daimim, is inanimate, is the lowest of all the 4 kingdoms. When you say Daimim, Tzemeach, Chai, Medaber, Daimim is the most inanimate, the most least revealed amount of energy is in the inanimate. The inanimate. Then there's vegetation is a little more. You see it grow. Then there's chai, the animal spirit, and then there's medaber, the human being. So that's these are the asius. The letters are daimon. Now he says lepomim nikra b'shem eretz, or lepomim b'shem midbar. So what's the difference between land, we'll call it a fertile land, and a wilderness, a desert? That's the difference if the Dvar Hashem is revealed or not revealed. Eretz u'matzmiach. When you're talking about regular land, it makes things grow. But Afar Midbar, the dust of the sand of the the dry sand of the desert, eina matzmiach, due to the great heat that doesn't allow things to grow. And what is that, lamaila? The difference is the Dvar Hashem revealed or not revealed? So what do you see from this? That midbar is connected to dibur. When the divine energy that comes from God's words, that vivifies and energizes, sustains existence, is concealed, that's called the state of a dry, arid state, a midbar, a desert. When the words of Hashem, when the words of the divine are revealed, that's called eretz, a land that makes things grow. That's the difference between the two. So it's two states of consciousness, essentially. Okay. And yet, at the same time, as we're going to learn soon more about this, it's that very darkness of the midbar, that arid state, that dry state, that elicits and draws out a deeper thirst, as we learned before. Okay, now comes the parentheses. The parentheses is where I really sped up, so I'm going to elaborate on the parentheses now. What do we see from this? Let's just establish what we've right now, sum up what I just said. We see and establish from this that dryness and the difference between dry land and which is dry earth, or you could say the dry dust of the desert sand, versus a fertile earth of a place that grows, that things that grow, is the difference between moisture and dryness. So physically, with something there's moisture, there's irrigation, there's water, it allows the earth to cause things to grow. If it's dried up due to extreme heat, things can't grow. So you see from this that mayim, water and land, are two states, except he's talking here in land itself, the difference between desert and fertile land and fertile ground. So in the parentheses, he elaborates more about this, that in general, we talk about the difference between yam and eretz, water and land. That's what we speak about. Water is connected to its source. Land that's why it's called alma diskasya, the hidden worlds, like fish inside water. You have neshamas, souls like Moshe Rabbeinu, who is drawn from water, called nuna yama. They're like the fish in the sea. They're always aware and always connected to their source. It's one of the reasons fish don't need shechita. You don't need to have a shechita for fish, because fish are always immersed, I should say, submerged in their source, in a mikveh. So it purifies them. Like when we say Mashiach comes, Mola Arz De'es Hashem, Kamayim LaYam Achasim. The world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So water symbolizes, as the Rambam says, the Me'ah Das HaToyer, it symbolizes Das Hashem, being immersed in the divine energy. That's what water is. You find this, for example, in the Gemara that talks about when the woman of the Romans asked Rabbi Akiva, why is it that Jews have to constantly learn Torah? And 3 days can't pass without reading the Torah. That's why we have Kriya on Monday and Thursday and Shabbos. And he answered with an example, that there was once a fox came to the edge of the sea and said to the fish, why not come on land and spend some time together with me? Why do you have to be in the water all the time? And the fish said to the fox, we thought they consider you to be the slyest, the wisest, the pikach, the wisest of creatures. You're not so wise, because if we come out from the water, we die. Now the fox was looking for a quick meal. The fish was saying, our water is our sustenance. It's not like we want a change of climate or a change of venue. So the Kiva said the same idea. So being in water is a sign of being connected to your life force. Land, he said, is the level of Alma Dizgalia. It's revealed. Here, the land is more prominent, and you don't see quite that connection. So the neshamas that connect to not nunayama, not like fish in the sea, like rather you say land mammals or land animals, they are disconnected. So what's the difference? One is that the water, is dominant. And even though there is a seabed and there's land under the water, but it's all submerged. And on land, you don't have that direct connection. So you could still be connected, but overall, so Yam va'aretz represent two states of consciousness. Chassidus sometimes explains that water is like thought. Thought, you have ideas. What dominates? Ideas. Even though there are also letters, but the letters are submerged in the waters of thought. When you speak, speech is compared to land, because in speech, what's more prominent are the words themselves, even though they also carry ideas. But it's not so dominant. That's why when you're thinking, you don't always recognize that you're thinking with words or letters. When you speak, you have to recognize their letters, because that's the only way to speak. For the communication to be legible, to be coherent, you have to be able to express it in words. So speech is compared more to aretz, and yam is, and machshav is compared to yam. Okay. So that explains on a deeper level what we're talking about here. Two states. One is where you're more aware of godliness. Basically, the oyer is more dominant and the keli is more submerged, or the keli is more prominent and the oyer is more concealed. That's the difference between yam va'aretz. What is that in the spheres? That aretz is the level of the lower level of malchus, chitzenius malchus. He doesn't say it explicitly, but means that yam would be primius malchus. Okay. Now, however, what we just said is water and land. What we've been discussing is in land itself, the difference between desert, the dry desert sand, and fertile earth. So even though eretz is not water, but it has water in it, that's why it's moist. So he says that's the difference. In eretz itself, we also have two levels, eretz and adama. So that's the difference between the dry season, which is in Nisan, and the wet season, which begins in Tishrei. There's two seasons. And we're talking about in Israel. Essentially, the difference between the dry season, beginning of the spring, summer, where the rains don't fall, and then in Tishrei, essentially October approximately, is when the rains begin to fall. That's why we say Merit HaGeshem after Tishrei and so on. So he says like this. That's when we say sometimes you call it Eretz, land, and Adama, earth. Adama is the wet season. That's when the earth becomes more moist and therefore more attached. And the dry season is when the earth becomes more splintered and more fragmented. So what do you see from this? That in land itself, there's also in Eretz, we didn't get to Midbar yet, a desert. In earth, on earth itself, there's a more dry season and a wet season. So that's similar to the same idea as water and land. The difference is how much gili there is. Just like water represents a more higher state of consciousness and land is a lower state, the revealed worlds in earth itself, in land itself, there's the difference between the dry season and the wet season. Right. So what this would mean is the following. Pure water, like a level of neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, that's a state of total connection all the time, like a fish in water. Moist land, the wet season, is not quite that level of Atzilus, but it's the level in Bria or in Biyah, which is already land, not water, but the land is saturated with moisture. It's the wet season. That's why it makes things grow. So he explains that's the level of bitla yesh. The yesh is there, it's land, it's not water. Water, there's no yesh altogether. Because there's a bitl mimitzias, like we learned before, like Bnei Yerushalayim, for example. Now we're talking about land, but the land is saturated with water, and water is a sign of sustenance and life, the divine life force, and therefore there's bitl hayesh. The dry season, the yesh is more prominent. It's not quite that bitl because it's dry. It's dry land, as opposed to the moist land of earth, of Adama, during the Tishrei, during the wet season. That's what he says. So even though water is the hidden worlds and land is the revealed worlds, there's sometimes where the hidden world affects the revealed worlds. That's where we're talking about the wet season when land is moist. And then he added from Torah from the Maimer and Chanukah Mezuzim Yamin, where he says that's the difference when God created the world existence through Dvar Hashem. Remember Midbar. Dvar Hashem created the very yeshes, like the container, the very substance of earth. And the Chefetz Hashem, that created the Bitl Hayesh, the Tzura, which is more the refinement, the power to refine earth. So what you see from this, the same idea. So Dvar Hashem, remember Dibur, as I said, is more Alma Dizgalia, it's more revealed. Thought is more concealed, more like water. But in a wet season, even the earth is also saturated with moisture, and that moisture signifies the idea of bittul. Okay. Then he added one more piece, summing up what we learned. Gam Yesh Lemer, he said, Mayim also refers to the Kav. The Ben Pasach Aliyo and Tikkun Zeir that we say on Fridays, he brings that Mayim is Mayik the Ashkeli Lana. It's like the water that irrigates the tree. And that refers to the Gili of the Kav. Now remember, we learned about the Kav. The Kav is the pipeline, is the lifeline that comes from before the Tzimtzum, that enters and radiates in Atzilus. Remember, he said the Neshamas of Atzilus, why are they submerged? Why are they so connected? Like in a state of Ibur, pregnancy, is because the umbilical cord, like the Kav, is feeding them directly. So he's comparing that as well. That this, when we say that the irrigation, the water that's coming into the land, meaning in the moist, in the wet season, that refers to the Gili of the Kav. So the Fizeh, he says, Adama, that level of Adama, earth, the wet earth, not Eretz, the dry, the wet, so that's Malchus as it's in Atzilus, where there the air is radiating also on the Neshamas, because it's directly connected to the Kav. Once the Neshama is going to Biyah, then you don't have quite that link. That's why it goes after the partition. There it's more concealed, and there it's not quite that connection. That's why you don't call them Yerushalayim anymore, Yerushalayim. And that's what he says. That's what Mayim does. What does water do when earth becomes moist? It's mechaber umedabek es adama. It attaches things. When earth is dry, it starts falling apart. When the earth is moist, you see it gets like more clumped together. The mashal, the example for that is that moisture creates a dvekus of the neshama in godliness, which is the state of neshamis and atzilus. And nevertheless, the next level, so we have the level of water, mamish water, like Moshe. You have the level of water, as in moist, the wet season, the earth is wet. That he doesn't say explicitly, but that would be more like Atzilus in Bria, what he called before, like Avram Avinu, before the Nisyanus. And then there's the level of Eretz itself, the dry season, which is still Eretz, still Dvar Hashem. Like he said, it's a Dvar Hashem because Alma Dizgali, the revealed world, is also created by God's speech. But here it's already more concealed. So you could say it's like the Neshamas of Biyah. But then comes one level that's lower, and that's the desert. The desert is even lower than Eretz, even lower than the dry season. It's not like the earth in the month of Nisan, which may not be as fertile as in the wet season in Tishrei, but it's still land. Then comes the level of Midbar. And Midbar is the dry, arid, and it's so dry that nothing grows at all. Period. And that's when the Dvar Hashem is not just no longer thought like in this water state, and not longer Dibur, where the Dibur is Begili in the land state, but it's connected. It senses that moisture connected to the divine energy, but now it's concealed. And since it's concealed, so his Gabrus Hayeshes Biyesa. So what is most prominent? The dry, arid, the dust of the desert sand. Nothing grows there. Kenyan, he says, and he compared that to like a dry throat, a hoarse throat. When the throat is dry, it doesn't have moisture, you can't speak clearly. It's raspy. The sound doesn't come out, or doesn't come out altogether, or it comes out in a limited form. Ein adibur begili. So that's a physical example of when the dryness is not allowing the flow of the divine speech. And it needs moisture. A throat needs moisture to be able to speak clearly. And that concludes the paragraph. This is a summation of what we've learned. So what you see here, what he's enumerating here is basically the levels. I was thinking that perhaps this corresponds to the 4 levels of neshama shenasata b'tahirehi ata baros ata yitzata ata nefachta, because at the end of the day we have 4 levels here: water, the wet season of land, Adama, earth, the dry season of land, Eretz, and Midbar. I don't know if it's correct or not to say it, but he does say 4 levels here. Okay. So before I continue learning inside, let me just stop here if anybody wants to ask any questions. Any questions? No questions?
I know he doesn't say this here, but Makshava was Mayim, Dibor was Makshava Dibor is land. So Misa would be what? I mean, I know he doesn't say it, but
I have no idea.
No? Okay.
Well, in the context of worlds, Machshav is usually Bria, Dibur is Yitzira, and Maisa is Asiya. If you want specifically those 3 levels. If that corresponds here, you probably can find the connections to that. I don't know if we could say Midbar is Asiya, I don't know. Okay. One more thing I want to point out before we continue learning. Remember, the topic is not over yet. I noticed something interesting. I don't know if this is a coincidence or very, very deliberate. I mean, I would always lean to say that it's deliberate, but it seems to be some type of pattern here. From approximately well, even earlier, seems to me that there's been if you look at it over the last, let's say 10 pages, there's been a lot of emphasis on different verses from the book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And we know Shir HaShirim is actually the story of interface, the story of 2 lovers, Anila Deidi v'Deidi Li, coming to Elul. And who are the beloved ones? Hashem and Knesset Yisrael, Hashem and the people. And it's the story of their love and their connection, as the Rambam says. It's written in a romantic version of a man and a woman on earth, but it's all a mashal for that, as Rashi says, and everyone speaks about this. And in general, the very fact that there's a man and woman on earth is a mashal, is a manifestation of the divine and the creation of the Machav. And he speaks about, just to point out, he began when he spoke about the Malachim. If you remember, he said that that's the pasuk that says, Achalti Yari im Divshi, which says, I've eaten Yari, my sugar cane, with the sugar. We spoke about the sugar cane, the honeycomb and the honey. That was one verse. Then he went to a verse now, Shcheda Nivanova. That's another verse of Shir HaShirim. I am dark, but comely, but beautiful. And then, and Bnei Yerushalayim, all Shir HaShirim. Then, let me just see, there was a few others that I want to point out. Well, the next one is actually going to be the next paragraph. That's what struck me, because he continues to bring. Oh, the next one was the pasuk Mitzvos Elim Midbar. It's another verse from Shir Hashirim. Who is that one that elevates from the desert, from the wilderness? And there he talks about the Midbar. And now he's going to bring yet a fourth verse from Shir Hashirim in the next paragraph. So it struck me that perhaps that the Rebbe Rashab, in addition to the central theme, has another like sub, like you could say it a type of undercurrent, another subset, a sub theme that demonstrates and shows us how Shir Hashirim is very much the story of Ayin Beis, or Ayin Beis is the story of Shir Hashirim, if you wish. This story of Shir Hashirim, these different verses all coming together, how a beloved is speaking about her or his beloved. I just wanted to point that out. It just struck me that I see so many psukim from Shir Hashirim, and then when I looked up the Medrash on Shcherani, I realized it's all connected to Shir Hashirim one way or another. And we know Basa Legani Achesi Kala, of course, famous mimer, last mimer of that Friedrich Rebbe and the first of the Rebbe, became such a fundamental mimer. Every year the Rebbe would say that mimer Yud Shvat. It's of course also from Shir Hashirim. And I mentioned Elul, Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, yet again from Shir Hashirim. So I just as an observation. I don't know how much to read into it. I'm just pointing it out that jumped out at me.
You also talked about the Kala a few days ago.
Yeah, correct. A good point, right? That the Kala, the soul as it comes down below, it's called Kala, right? That was on the top of page 1458. Yeah. Okay. I also find, if I may already comment, I also find the visualization here of first of all, the visualization of pregnancy, explaining the pregnancy in the context of a mother, a fetus, the umbilical cord, and how it's all connected. I think is I've used this example a lot, but it's really helps us understand why did God make it that way. Before a child is born, the child is connected completely with its source, like a fish in water, essentially. And then the second visualization here, what we just read and discussed about water and land, is just so, besides the poetry of it, it gives you a whole take on so many things in nature that reflect essentially our connection with godliness. The connection of water and land, dry, wet, as I said, fetus, mother, birth, the embryonic waters, then separation, and the birthing of a child, and then the growth, and of course the extreme of wilderness, where it's completely dry, and the other extreme of water, where complete land, complete water. It just gives a whole picture. It's like almost a geological map, as well as a psychological and spiritual one of reality in this context. Also something that jumps out at you when you read these pages. I don't know if you all picked that up, but that's what seems to me when I read it. Okay. Good.
I have a question. We're learning, we learned before, but I'm a discussion here. And it seems like the water, in this case, is the opposite. It's more transmittable, and when it gets arid or dry, it's less transmittable.
Well, the Almi Discasi is the highest type of world where everything is concealed within the water because it's connected to its source. Alma Disgalia is where it starts separating, so the entity is separated from its source. So what do you mean by opposite?
Oh, I thought it's like unacceptable. I always looked at it. Alma Discasi is unaccessible to us. I guess it's the other way.
No, it's like the superconscious. It's like thought. It's connected to its source. Yes, it's more. We are disconnected. That's why we don't access it. It's Alma Discasi essentially is the superconscious, and Alma Disgal is the conscious. And the goal is to bridge the two. Okay. And now comes, let's continue now, the next paragraph in the bottom of page 1458. And the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. And now going to bring yet another verse in Shir Hashirim. And here it says, Achine Siv. Somebody wants to say something?
Yeah, quick question about that. When you start out with Tehillim from David Melech, Mizmor David bin Midbar Yehuda, in the desert. But then he says, Samalacha Nashi Kamalacha Basari the Eretz Sia. Eretz, we said there's a distinction between Eretz and Midbar. He first starts off by saying he's in the Midbar, and then he says,
but it says Eretz Sia v'Oyev.
Yeah, what is
an
Eretz
arid and dry land? Midbar is also land.
Okay. Oh. Mm-hmm. All right.
He's not distinguishing there between Eretz and Midbar. He's just describing what a Midbar is.
Gotcha.
A Midbar is a dry, arid land has no water.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, the entire earth is ultimately called Eretz. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. It's Eretz. Eretz itself, we now distinguished, has water, has wetland, has dry land, has desert. So he doesn't mean Eretz there like Eretz later where it's that makes things grow. There he's specifically talking about as a midbar. Okay. So now 3 lines from the bottom of the page says, now, we still have to go back and understand. We've established that midbar and medaber and dibur are connected. And it's all about how much of the Dvar Hashem is revealed. More revealed is obviously a higher level. When it's less revealed, that's when you have the dry earth and you don't see the connection to the divine. That's what in the midbar, you say midbar is a state of darkness. What he called before, hell and Vehester. So now comes another verse. The verse in Shir Hashirim that says, Achine Ksiv, it says, Umidborech nove. And your words are comely. Your words are nove. The same thing, Shcheira Niva nove. Your words are beautiful. Or comely. I see everywhere the ones that translate into English, they use the word comely. I don't know. I like beautiful better. But that is a word they use, the translators use. So what is he talking there about? So according to the Medrash, I think Rashi too, he's talking about when the Yidden sang Shira, the words that they sang were beautiful. The words they sang after the parting of the sea are beautiful words. In Shir Hashirim, it's talking about my beloved's words are beautiful. So you see here the word midbarech. On one hand, it means speech, words. On the other hand, it also, we learned before, is like midbar. And remember the Medrash said, Shcheir ani b'midbar v'nova ani b'midbar. You have both sides in the midbar. You have the dark side, the darkness, but you also have a nova, the beautiful side, the comely side. So now he's coming back to that point, and he's bringing the Medrash that said, if you remember, Mizeis elam min hamidbar. What did he say? The Medrash said, Kol iluyev min hamidbar. Actually, the Medrash doesn't say the word kol. The Rebbe Rashab adds the word kol. He says, iluyev min hamidbar. The elevations of the people of Israel, Bnei Yisrael, happen in the midbar. And he enumerates, as I said, Matan Torah, the man, the different things that happened to them in the midbar that elevated them and prepared them. So he says like this, Umidbarech nava, and your words are sweet, not sweet, beautiful. Shekol iluyev min hamidbar. Like we said before from the Medrash, he's quoting the Medrash that he brought 4 lines top of the last paragraph, from the top of the last paragraph. So we see like this. So what do you see from this? Is midbar or dibur, is it a positive or negative? It depends. There's an element that's negative, which is concealed and dark and dry. And there's an element, and the speech is concealed. Like he said, when the speech is concealed, mustav and elam, oz nikra midbar, shem b'zeh shum giliyot. But there's also, we said the darkness itself propels and drives and serves like a catalyst toward Vinova, toward beauty, toward the thirst, and toward the yearning and longing. So he's now going to explain these two sides in Midbar. The Kamoishi Yesh, Midbar Belumazeh, just like there's a Midbar in the negative side, Ilumazeh and Klippa. Like we said, a Midbar is a place, a parched, arid land, where the Dibur Dvar Hashem is concealed and doesn't let things grow. That means there's no Gili there. Refers to a dark state. Kamoikei Yesh Midbar Kedusha. Same thing, there's a Midbar Kedusha. And this goes back to, I mentioned Likutei Torah in Parsha Bamidbar. This is discussed there. We talks about these two levels of Midbar. Midbar is a negative and Midbar is a positive. And what's the Midbar de Kedusha? We just spoke about the Midbar in L'umazeh, a parched land where you don't feel any Kedush Eli Elikus. You feel no moisture. It's dry, arid. And what's the Midbar de Kedusha? B'Kedusha, what we said before, that's the level of the intense yearning and thirst. With intensification, the overpower and the overpowering flames of fire of the soul as it thirsts and longs, the passion of the soul. So before we said the Aish, the Chema Aish, the extreme heat in the desert, is what causes the land to be so dry and parched that it can't make things grow. That's in L'umazeh. But there's another side, that it creates such an intense thirst that also drives a fire. It's a fire of passion because you're so thirsty and so longing. That's the other side of Midbar. So the same situation that brings so much, in a way, pain and feeling a lack and being deprived, like David HaMelech said, Eretz Siv Oyev Bli Moyim, brings also Atzoma L'chanafshi, Atzoma, a profound level of thirst. It's interesting, I was just reading an article in the Wall Street Journal that the hottest place on earth, I think it's called Desert Valley in California, right? And it like gets 130 degrees. I think the record is 134 degrees Fahrenheit, 55 degrees Celsius. And people go there just to experience that extreme heat. They wait for this. It's around 2 months a year that it's so hot. The rest of the year is much cooler there. Desert Valley, or Death Valley, not Desert Valley, Death Valley, California. So I was just thinking about it as we're reading this. What?
Isn't that Nevada, Death Valley? On the way to California, perhaps.
I think it's in California. I think it's near Nevada. I don't know.
Outside of Vegas, I think.
I think it's actually in California.
Okay.
It's mostly California, but it spreads to Nevada.
Okay. There you go. Everything is reconcilable.
Yeah, we drove through there on the way to California. It's really a wasteland. It's like nothing there. It's just rock and very barren.
In the heat, they say in the winter it's nice there. People like to be there.
Wow.
Anyway, point being is that people go. So bottom line is I'm just pointing out that I read about it. That so people go there. That's it. I don't know if they're going there to experience the L'umazeh or the Kedusha. I hope they're going to experience Tzoma L'chanafshi, because then you have the deepest thirst in the driest, in the hottest places. But regardless, we're going to talk more about this. I just want to read inside as he explains it, but there's tremendous psychological insight here, if you wish, about when you see people who are extremely deprived, how that very deprivation can lead to the deepest levels of passion in a good way, if you know how to channel it and direct it. It's really what he's saying here. That is the darkest of the dark. In this case, the driest of the dry, that can lead one to the deepest levels of tzmoyin, what he's calling rishpei eish, shebenefesh, the fiery flames of the soul. So, but let's read on and then we'll go back and we're going to understand this. It clearly is connected to what we learned earlier about the Helam below, connecting the Helam Ha'atzmi. I hope he makes that direct connection. In that, the Rebbe Rashab himself makes that connection, but it's very similar words if you look back there to what he's saying here. But let's continue reading. There's a parenthesis now. But before I read the parentheses, any questions? It's not a long parenthesis, it's 4 lines, but so here's the parentheses. The Bechinis Yeseda Eish Shabenefesh Alekis. Okay, before we read, let me explain this because this is a little needs some introduction. Some of you are maybe familiar with it. It says the end of the first chapter in Tanya. So there he talks about the Nefesh Habamis. But basically, everything is made up of 4 Yesedis, 4 elements, called Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. Literally translated fire, air or wind, fire, air, water, and earth. Now, this was definitely based on, I guess I would say, more ancient science. Today we know there are more elements than the 4, but the Rebbe has a bunch of letters that explains that these are 4 archetypes. I think even one letter he explains that there are 4 elements that exist in every atom. You have the electron is Eish, you have a proton, a neutron, and what's the 4th thing? I forgot. But bottom line is that there's 4 elements. So 4 archetypes. There in Tanya he explains them as personality types, like archetypes. Eish being the passion, the source of passion, source of anger, source of arrogance. Mayim is the source of pleasures. Ruach is the source of emptiness. There it's in the negative. And Ofer is the source of basically slothfulness, laziness, depression. It's heavy. But also in Kedusha, there's Dal Yesodis. Later in Tanya, he, I think, either alludes to it or says it explicitly, that there's also Dal Yesodis Nefesh Halikis. The fire, the fiery passion for godliness. There's the water, there's the Ruach and Ofer, which I'm not going into here. So when he says there's Chinas Yeseda Eisha B'Nefesh Halikis, that's referring to the element of fire in the divine soul. Now, we learned earlier that the Malachim also burn with fire. Remember, there's Malachim that are called Seraphim. Seraphim means fiery ones. They're burning. What are they burning with? They're burning with a fiery passion to godliness. So now he's adding something that connects back to the Malachim. We'll soon see what he's going to do with this. So he says that this Yesod Eish in the Nefesh Halikis is greater than the fiery flame of the Malachim, of the angels. The top of page 1459. Hagam she Yesedim Yesod Eish. Even though those angels, that fire, you say them, their very foundation, their very fundamental nature is fire. That's why they're called Seraphim. Not just that they burn with fire. We don't say that a neshama is a fire. We say a neshama has fire. They're actually called the fiery ones. That's the extent of how their whole being is fire. There are other angels, Malachim, they're the angels called Efanim, there are angels called Chayes HaKodesh, but there are angels called Seraphim. V'hanefesh halikis hariklulim b'kol haYesedis. And Nefesh halikis is not just called fire, it has also the other Yesedis. It encompasses all 4 elements, including water and including earth and including wind or air. You just said that Nefesh halikis is fire, the passion. And fire of the divine soul is greater than the angels. So it's not it's a question, but it's a qualification. So though the Seraphim are exclusively fire, and Nefesh Halikis is not exclusively fire, it has also the other elements. Makol Mokim, you say that Eisha B'Nefesh Halikis. So even though Nefesh Halikis has more to it than just the fire of the Seraphim, that the Seraphim have exclusively, nevertheless, you say the Eisha the Nefesh Halikis Ulamayli Yeser. Not a contradiction. Just because they're called Seraphim doesn't mean their fire is as powerful as the fire of the divine soul. So it's higher than the mipnei shenashamas and lamayla malachim. This is due to the fact because neshamas are higher than malachim, like we learned earlier. They're rooted higher than malachim. Al came it says shedish nishmosam. That's why, due to the root of their souls that are higher than malachim, harish be'eshalahem gam ken gadol yeser. The fiery flame that they have is also greater. But let's explain this a minute. Obviously, he's talking here on a revealed level. I'm talking about, on an essential level. On the revealed level, malachim are higher than the shamas as they come down below. That's why we need them. We need their support. We need their, with birchus yetzer that we say before Shema, because they are actually burning in fire, and the shama below has a deeper potential for fiery passion, but it's not revealed. So let's make this clear. This parenthesis is not coming to contradict what he said earlier. So malachim definitely have more revealed level of it. But when a neshama does get ignited, and when a neshama is accessing its very core fire, it's higher than the fire of malachim, like we also learned earlier. That malachim are like the light that allows the eye to see, but the eye sees and the light doesn't see. The malachim, no matter what the fact that they help us, they support us, but it's only a siyua. Bottom line is they don't see quite as a neshama sees. That's why they say ayem became kvede. They ask and wonder, where is the place of your covenant? Because they don't see it. We learned this earlier. So that's what he's qualifying here. Why he's bringing it, I'm assuming it's connected to what we learned earlier about malachim and neshamas, because why else would he suddenly bring this into the picture? But what he is saying is the following, that, and I know he could ask the question, so then what do we mean? He's saying here that is the midbar, is the arid, dry, and waterless darkness, shcheirani, that's eliciting this profound fiery passion of the thirst of Kedusha, of midbar the Kedusha. So you could ask the question, so what do we need malachim for? Our own darkness does it. So this is going to be addressed. We're going to talk about this more. So just keep in mind, that's not I don't want to ignore that question. Because now you could say, fine, before you were saying the souls below are in a state of darkness, so therefore they need a light to shine to help them see. But now you're saying that the darkness itself brings out their deepest passion. So I'm sure you could speculate what the answer to that is. You need both. It's like you need the malachim to get it going, but once it's going, so in other words, there's the thirst that we have, there's the malachim that show us as a living example what it means to be inspired, and together the neshama then rises to a place that's far higher than malachim. I already gave the answer, but we'll talk about this more as we learn further. But I just wanted to not ignore, because he's literally bringing malachim back into the picture. So it's the question jumps out immediately. You're just telling us now that it's the darkness that elicits this deep passion, the cheshach. I'm just looking from the top of page 1455. He makes reference. He says, "Metecha shecha barasi eira adenefesh habamis." Yeah. Okay. So that's what he said in the parentheses. And stop any questions. Let me just stop here. Go slowly. Make sure we absorb all these. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Okay. So now back to the pnim, outside the parentheses. So what he say is that midbar the Kedusha is the teikif harotzi vatzemoyin, is the intense yearning and thirst of the overpowering flames of fire and passion of the nefesh. The parentheses, he called it the nefesh alikis. U'kamoshe kosov. Next line, the fourth line on page 1459 we're up to. After the u'kamoshe kosov, the Pasuk says, the evim gam tzmeim nafsham behem tisatov. The evim gam tzmeim nafsham behem tisatov. That's the way you're supposed to read it. Two phrases. The evim gam tzmeim, they are hungry and also thirsty. Nafsham behem tisatov. The souls, the spirits, behem, within them get wrapped. Tisatov from the word wrapped. So they're coming from a state of hunger and thirst. Says the Rebbe Rashab, the lechera begashmis ain't a mover. On a very physical level, on a very basic level, not understandable, this statement. How's it possible for one to be hungry and thirsty at the same time? Shimu Rav ain't it some. If he's hungry, he's not thirsty. To be honest, I'm not sure what his question is. Maybe somebody has a thought on this. Why can't you be hungry and thirsty at the same time? Unless he means to say, if the emphasis is on your hunger, why are we focusing on thirst? But he says, begashmis, it sounds like when you're hungry, you're not thirsty. Why? Because it's bechlal masai mana. Any thoughts on this? I'm throwing it out to the class here. Why is he asking this question? Why can't you be hungry and thirsty at the same time? Interesting. I see from the, let's go on. Maybe the answer will help us understand the question. Sometimes that happens. And he says, begashmius. In other words, so let's continue reading. I'll go back to the question. If anyone wants to share something, I'll come back to it. Ella, however, the truth, this verse is not talking begashmis. He's talking zel b'chinas haruchnis. He's talking about in the spiritual state. Sheyesh ava she k'moy rav l'lechem. There's a love like someone who's hungry for bread. I am mashnis bar le'il be'inyan beis b'chinas raven or oven. To look earlier, he says, he's telling us to look earlier. We spoke about two types of hunger. I recall that's at the end of volume 2, if I recall correctly. I don't think it was in volume 3. I have to look up what that means anyway. And then v'yeshava she b'chinas semoyin. And then there's a love that's like a state of thirst. She b'teikif yesod b'chinas mesiras nefesh. It's more intense in a state of mesiras nefesh. You're ready to give your life for it. Whereas Rav L'Lechem, he's considers, I guess, to mean a weaker love. So the love of hunger is a love that comes from hunger, and there's a love that comes from thirst. And that's what the pasuk means in Evim Gam Tzemeim. So I don't know if it added, if this helps us understand what the question was, but clearly he's saying that in spiritual, you could see you could have both. And in unless he means that Evim Gam Tzmeim, maybe the focus on the word Gam. The Evim, they're thirsty, they're hungry, Gam, and also thirsty. Not sure. I can continue reading and we can get back to this, unless anybody wants to comment.
I just want to say something. Usually, a lot of times they say that when you feel thirsty, a lot of times you're actually. I'm sorry. You feel hungry. You're actually thirsty more than you're hungry. So a lot of times, like all you need is water, and then the hunger goes away. So I think that maybe it's something that may play into this, because hunger and thirst are two separate ordeals. But sometimes you could think that you're hungry, but you're really thirsty. I don't know if that adds anything to this.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like he's saying that. Here it sounds more like that they don't come together. That when you're one, you're not the other. I'll give it some more thought. Let's see. It's fine. Not everything we get the first time around. What can you say? I'd continue reading just to understand what he's saying, and then maybe things will get clarified. Still need to understand what this means. So basically he's saying that love is coming from the lack of something. He's not talking about love that is fulfilling. He's talking about a love that's coming due to a lack. So it could be due to a lack like the hunger, a lack due to hunger, or a lack due to thirst, which he says is deeper. And that's what the verse is referring to. But let's see how he's going to explain this further. V'zehu inyan b'chinas midbar. And this is the level of midbar. He means the midbar of Kedusha, the positive one. Should take a varotze b'chinas mesidus nefesh mamish. That's intense yearning and intense longing, literally to the point of mesidus nefesh. So mesidus nefesh here means obviously where you're dying for it. Doesn't mean here necessarily physically dying, but it's not just that you want it, or you desire it. It's mesidus nefesh is you're ready to do anything for it. And this is the meaning that a midbar does not make things grow. So before we learned that was in the negative. It's so dry due to the extreme heat that doesn't allow anything to grow. There's no gili. Now he's explaining it in the Kedusha. What's a midbar in Kedusha that doesn't grow? Yeshlema b'nefesh hu b'chinas tekev harotze. We can say in the nefesh, in the spirit of a person, is the intensity of yearning and longing. Shurak b'chinas Allah. Ve'ein b'chinas shuv v'gili. That is completely consumed with yearning what it's looking for, and there's no shuv v'gili. It's not producing anything. No, rotze and shuv is rotze means you yearn for something, and shuv means you return and you integrate it. You bring it into a gili. But if someone is completely expiring in their absorption and being dissolved and completely absorbed in the rotze, in that yearning and that thirst that he's talking about, so there's no smicha. Nothing's coming. It's like a student that is so absorbed with their teacher that they don't have the ability and the presence of mind to go teach the idea and share it with someone else. Because you're so, I don't know the word excited, but you're so subsumed by it that you can't be matzmiach anything. That's not necessarily the kavanah, but it's a deep level of klesa nefesh, which sometimes is actually criticized even. But it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from a Kedusha place. So he's showing here how midbar is not semeach, the dark midbar, the one that's the arid, dry land. That's due to the fact there's no giluyim, there's no dvar Hashem in a revealed way, so nothing grows. It's like empty. It's dark. It's a dark place. Here he's saying it's a place that's higher than gilui, because you're so absorbed. It's like the expression, I think he's going to bring it. I did the tarid lemivla leipolit. When someone's busy absorbing, they can't be exuding. When you're listening, you can't be speaking. Here, speaking is like gilui, is the idea of gilui of matzmiach, shuv gilui. That's how he teaches the positive element of the deep passion and deep yearning. And that's true. If you sometimes see, you talk about the Ava Rabba or Tshuva Ma'ava of someone who's due to their tremendous thirst and their tremendous lack, they've now come to a passion for something. You ever see someone who's hasn't drank water for a while, and their mom is dying from thirst, and they start drinking? They lose themselves. They don't have time to start sharing with anyone else. They become so desperate just to drink. I'm just using an example, a physical example. So you see here that it's not matzmiach. Doesn't give growth. It's not integrated, and therefore it's not producing. It's only absorbing. Umakol Mokim, says the Rebbe Rashab, Mizen nasa hashuv, ukamoshi is boyer. Yet don't think that it remains there. From this deep yearning will come ultimately a shuv. Because remember, when you get connected to God, God says to you, you have to come back down and make a dira b'tachtenim. So this passion can't be an end in itself. I'm telling you more or less what it's going to say later and what Chassidus says about this. Because remember, it's not a selfish yearning just for me. At that moment, there's no tzmicha. But the Kolmokim, from this will come Nasa Shuv, Ukamoshi is boy, as shall be explained later. Trying to remember if he actually explains it or not. We'll see. I think he does. Yeah. So that's all explaining Midbar now in the Kedusha side. So the Midbar, the negative side, we learned Shcheirani. It's dark. There's no revelation. And therefore things don't grow. There's no Gilui. The Midbar. But then there's the Soma that it creates, the thirst and the passion. And here too, it's a Midbar of Kedusha now. That thirst and passion. And now he's added also, Lasnat Matzmiach. That aspect doesn't make things grow because it's completely absorbing and not producing. Yeah. I think I think this may be an example as well. You know, when you irrigate land to make things grow, there's a whole process. It's a whole science. For example, if land has been parched for a long time, the first thing you have to do is water it to just get it moist. Because the earth is like a very thirsty individual that is just going to soak up everything. It's not going to start growing right away. So first you have to get the earth to absorb water. Then comes the stage two. Once the earth has acclimated, become more moist, that's when you start the work of planting and sowing to make things grow. Somewhat of an example here too, that there's a state where it's so passionate about absorbing because it's so thirsty. That's not a time when things grow. The growth has to come after that has been so-called stabilized. Then it's like the resources. You're just drawing. You're just what's the word? You're just consuming. You're sucking down all the resources. That's not the word I want to use. It's draining all the resources because of this profound thirst. And then comes the next stage. Just to give another example for this. Again, let me pause here. Any questions? I know we still have to get back to the Rav and the Tzomeh, and I don't fully get it either. That thirst is deeper than hunger, that's for sure.
Rabbi?
I guess what he means, just 1 second, with thirst is deeper than hunger. When someone is very hungry, no matter how hungry you are, there's something about it that's not quite as desperate, if you wish, or another word for it.
You can exist without food for days, but you can't exist without water for days.
That's true. But also at some point you can't exist without food either.
True, but the one takes precedence over the other, I guess.
So that's one thing, but it sounds here that when you compare both of them, if you're absolutely hungry and absolutely thirsty, thirst for some reason elicits more passion than hunger. That's what he seems to be saying here. Not just that it happens faster, meaning that you need it more because you can't last without water. It sounds like he's saying he actually said, I think the idea is because, when you're lapping up water, there's something about it that's much more passionate than when you're eating, even if you're very hungry. I don't have the right words for it. I got to think about this some more. But okay, it's an interesting topic. And I also research a bit if this is discussed. It must be discussed in other places in Chassidus to see if there's anyone that elaborates more. I'm just pointing out that it's still a work in progress. There's things to be developed here.
Rabbi, there's a pasuk in chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot. It says, this is the way to acquire Torah. Eat bread with salt. Drink water in small measure. Sleep on the ground. Live a life of deprivation and toil in Torah. If you do this, you shall be happy and it should be well with you. You should be happy in this world and it should be well with you in the world to come. So here it's saying eat bread with salt. So it wants you to eat bread, but make yourself more thirsty with salt and then drink water in small measure and deprivation. Okay. Maybe it's related somehow, or it's in line with what the rabbi's teaching now.
Maybe. I don't see how yet, but it's possible. I'm definitely going to do research, and I ask you guys to do as well. Listen, this is what we do in learning. Sometimes you have to do a little exploration, some research. It's fine. Sometimes I it's part of the process of learning. I'm happy to say that I don't always get things on the first read myself, so it's fine. Okay. Next line, next section. It's going to give us now another Ein Matzmiach. Umagam, v'gam ma, she'ein matzmiach. Another way of explaining midbar of Kedusha that doesn't make things, that does not produce growth. The my payda mitzvah. The Gemara says in Seitan, where it talks about peiros. So what's peiros? The Gemara asks mitzvahs. Peiros, fruit, refers to mitzvahs. He's actually talking there about the egla arufa that has to be brought in a place where there's no things don't grow. So he explains what is peiros. Peiros is mitzvah. That somebody was deprived, was killed, God forbid, prematurely. So one of the things he was deprived of was being able to do mitzvahs. Another way it's sometimes associated with the Medrash. Rashi brings this. Teldus saying shel tzadikim el maisim tevim. The children, the offspring of tzadikim are good deeds. Sometimes associated with this, that fruit referred to mitzvah. And what's the point here? So if fruit is mitzvah, then midbar, u'b'chinas midbar, shehu l'mayla u'b'chinas ha-mitzvahs. So the midbar of Kedusha is talking about a level that's higher than the fruit of mitzvahs. Land that produces fruit is producing mitzvahs. Midbar is higher than mitzvahs. U'k'meshekasav b'midbar asher lo yoshev adam sham. In the midbar, in the wilderness, this is, I think, in the book of Yecheskel, talking about the wilderness, the desert, where no man lives. It's not a civilized place, not a place for people to live. So there are two meanings in that. There's a midbar le'umazed, no one lives there because it's not conducive to living. Or le'yotzav adam sham, that it's higher than Adam. Like he says now. Adam ubchinas ramach pikudim. Adam is a structure of the 248 mitzvahs, which correspond to Ramach Evarim de Malka, like we learned earlier, the 248 limbs of the king, the divine limbs. That's Adam, that's a tzir, that's a structure. Ava b'chinas midbar, but the level of midbar, hu l'maylam b'chinas Adam, liyashaza aliyah l'b'chinas kiloi Adam hu. Midbar is higher than Adam, being that it's an aliyah. It's an elevation to a level that's beyond structure, beyond Adam. So there's a place that's lower than Adam, that's midbar of l'umazeh, of the negative, and there's midbar that's higher than Adam. It says that Lukut Teira by midbar. So midbar now, we're talking about he's in a state that's higher than peiros, higher than smicha. So it's a second explanation in midbar le'matzmiach. The first explanation was that he's so absorbed that he's not producing anything. And here that it's a level higher than the Adam, the structure of mitzvahs, the peiros of the fruit of mitzvahs. And now he explains what this means. Dihine, because now, remember again, this is a stage. He's not saying this is a final place. He's saying the stage of this rotze, of this deep thirst, is one that takes the person to a place that's higher than smicha. But he did already say in the parentheses, the goal is to bring it back, shuv, and the goal is to bring it back into mitzvah. So he's going to explain, dehine. Because now, hamevi lebchinas semoyin zeh, what brought this person, what brings someone to such a level of thirst? Who ha'izbonus gam came b'chinas midbar. So before he said what brought him there is the darkness, the tremendous thirst, the tremendous lack and deprivation brought him to this thirst. But now he's going further and saying that what brings him to this semoyin, when someone is on this world, someone asked the question, I believe, the other day, we don't see everybody having this semoyin. Even though shcheirani, we live in a dark world and the soul is concealed, an animal soul and all the challenges. So clearly, to get to a level of semoyin, we need awareness. So what brings a person to this awareness? So yes, you could hit rock bottom, a state of distress, a state of difficulties and challenges that every person would cry out in thirst. But he's speaking here, but in general, the avodah is a hisbonus one. That it's a hisbonus gam kem b'bchinas midbar. It's due to contemplation where you think about and contemplate on this level of the midbar wilderness. V'hainu, this means kishmizbeinan as he contemplates. This looks like he's going back to this bonus of Echad. When you contemplate how all the worlds and all the Giluyim and all the revelations, even the highest levels of revelations, no matter how high of a revelation they are, compared to the Eibishter, compared to God himself, it's a midbar, it's a wilderness, shmama. And a desolation, a desolate place. Midbar v'shmama l'gabi yizbar. Chu k'moshe kosuv, like it says, l'chu chazu mipar leis elikim, asher shom shemes ba'aretz. L'chu chazu, go and see from the actions of God that he placed shames ba'aretz. Shames comes from the word shmama. In other words, look at the world and look how empty it is or how desolate it is compared to the Eibishter. But the Chazal say, Al tikre shames el shemes, that it's not just referring to the desolation and the darkness of this world. It's also referring to the shemes, God's names. The gambchin is shemesh ein zayin shemesh ein nimchokim. That even the names of God, the 7 names that you're not allowed to erase, Kael, Alakim, there's 7 names. It says ein nimchokim. They're holy names. Even them, he says, Hem gamkin b'chinas shames, hainu b'chinas shmama. That compared to the Etzem, compared to the one who's called by that name, the Eibush himself is compared to be a midbar. It's like arid, empty. That's how high it is. In other words, it's not just referring to real things that are absolutely devoid of godliness in a revealed way. Even the names of God himself are also compared shmama, compared to the God. Ukamaimer, like the statement in Paschalio, in Tikkun Zeyar, kad ant, the kad ant, tistalik minayu, that when you, the Eibishter, it removes himself from the kelim. Ishtar and kula shmohen kegufa b'lei masa. They all remain shmohen, like names. Names, and also means empty, like a body without a soul. So even though they're the names of God, and even though they're high level revelations, but compared to the source, even Oyer is like shmama, because what is it without the source? Like a body without a soul. I can't say Oyer. He doesn't say Oyer. He says Shmon. So the names is the Kelim probably. Like he says, he compares it to body without a soul. So just like there's an infinite distance between a body compared to the soul, so just like the distance of body to soul, what is a body without a soul? A corpse, empty, an empty shell.
An empty vessel.
An empty vessel. So too is the Shmon, is the names of God, that they're the Kelim compared to Ein Sof Baruch Hu. Pretty intense statement here. So we see Midbar. How do we get to that state of this type of Simoyin? When you start contemplating how everything in existence, and even the highest level, and these were revelations, even the names of God, are all like a Midbar, that creates the thirst. Ukamoy Kain, not just the Kelim, he goes further. Kamoy Kain Gama Eres and Gamkin Raka'ar Lavad. The contemplation goes further. Even the Eres of the divine, even divine energy, is also only a reflection. Shebein Erech Klal Gaba Atzmos. That's infinitely distant compared to Atzmos. which means v'hainu. This means Gama Eres Shalamayim B'chinas HaKelim Gam Kein Be'ein Arech. That the Eres, not just the Eres within the containers, even the Eres that are higher than the containers are also infinitely distant. Ukamaimer, like the Maimer that says this is a Maimer in Zayar, Keser Elyon. So Keser Elyon is considered the high level. Keser Elyon, supernal crown. Afal Gav, the Iu Er Kadman, even though it's a primordial light, meaning it's a Kadman, it precedes everything else. It's a light that comes from the beginning. Uchamhu, and it continues to call them Ilas HaIlas. That's what it says here. It's dark. Ucham is from the word dark in Aramaic, compared to the cause of all causes, which is the Eibishter himself. V'hainu shekola eres v'agiluyim, which means that all the energies and all the revelations, afilu hayeser al yenim, even the highest ones, hem kala uka'ayin mamish l'gaba atzmus. They're like nothing and null, mamish, literally compared to atzmus. And this is what causes the tzemayin. And when you contemplate on this, and this is what every living soul yearns for. Tichla is dissolved, it yearns for, reaches for. Tichla love nefesh kol chai. Every living soul li kolil b'chinas atzmus ein sof, to be encompassed in atzmus ein sof b'chinas kelei adam hu, in the level that is beyond adam. Remember, higher than a midbar. Hainu shalamayla mikol hagiluyim, meaning higher than, above all the revelations. V'hu b'chinas ata kodesh. This is the level ata kodesh, that you are removed. Kodesh from the word havdalah. Shalamayla b'chinas shimcha kodesh. So shimcha kodesh is the holy name shimcha kodesh. But we just said the names compared to Ata, you, Atzmus, is higher than Shimcha Kodesh. And this is the inyan of being bound to the very guf of the Melech. That's higher than the Ivarim of the Melech. This is higher than the Peiris, than the fruit. This is the Etzem itself, Commission is Bar Le'il, as was discussed earlier. Okay, so this is a heavy piece. Briefly, just to explain, what he's saying here is that it's dafka when a neshama comes down below and it's dark in the midbar of L'umazeh, a negative midbar that's arid and dry, eretz siya v'oyev, dry, no water, nothing can grow. That is dafka there, v'nova, that a soul will reach a place through the very thirst that generates. And like he said, this contemplation and realizing that I'm not alone. Everything in existence, even the highest levels, even the malachim, even the neshamas above, even Bnei Yerushalayim, he doesn't say it yet explicitly, but he will. All those levels, even though they're not arid, that's not a midbar. That's an eretz. That's even mayim. But they're all also, compared to atzmos, they're all like a midbar shmama. That is an awareness we only reach down here below. If you think about it, this is mind-blowing. Because in the shamas above, they don't feel this lack. They're connected, especially b'chinas ibur. He said a fetus is connected to its mother. The neshamas are connected to Atzilus, straight to the kav. They're getting fed directly from the main line, the main artery, and they feel godliness. Malachim are burning with fire to passionate God. It's only down below when you really hit the midbar, you hit the bottom where it's arid and you don't see any giluyim, that you come to an awareness, both first of all by what you're lacking, and secondly by contemplating and realize that even those higher levels compared to Atzmos, all of it is arid, is a midbar. That comes dafka below, and that is the midbar, the Kedusha that he's talking about, that can only come from the midbar of the other side, of the concealment, of the darkness. So it's not like maybe necessarily a new concept we haven't read before, because we did read that the Helam Lamata brings the Helam Ha'atzmi, but he's definitely putting it in words here that make it quite fascinating, that it is the people who lived in a life of desolation. Talk about the Baal Tshuva being higher than a tzaddik. Baal Tshuva who did not have any giluyim, and then comes to recognize the deep thirst they develop, and then you come to realize that their deep thirst, their connection is to a place that's higher than the tzaddikim and higher than all the giluyim, because compared to Atzmus, everything is a desert. Just because with our eyes, obviously a desert looks lower than a fertile ground or wetland, or we said the wet season, or even water itself. But when you compare to Atzmus, this is what you come to discover in Shcheir Ani below. Now, we did learn this, if you remember, that it's Dafka the Yesh below that discovers the Inarech of Atzmus, the Yesh Amiti. And even Oyer itself doesn't know that until the Yesh reveals that. So it's also going to be part of our further discussion. So it's all coming together in that way. But that's essentially what he's saying here about the Midbar of Kedusha. I can't say I have clarity about the Rav and the Tzomei, thirst and hunger, exactly what that means. That will need more research. But I could say pretty clear that it's pretty clear what he's explaining here about Midbar of Kedusha, that the level we reach. And then the next paragraph, if you read the next line, I'm going to stop here, but the next line is going to say, this Rotze is mischadish, but neshama dafka b'ridasa lamata. This is mischadish, this is innovated, only when neshama comes down below. So we're going to explain at length, or relatively at length, why it happens below. But it's pretty, as I said, he's already building that case. So I'll stop here at the end of this paragraph. And any questions?
So is it because, so this is the positive part of the yesh then, that you have to have a yesh in order to go higher, you have to have a consciousness, a self-awareness of your situation before you can actually get absorbed in the higher level. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I go even further. You have to even go lower than that. The yesh has to be such extreme that it actually causes you to feel thirst because you're feeling a lack. The deeper the thirst, the deeper you'll ultimately reach higher because you recognize the truths. It's I resist going into the psychological application of this, but I'll just say one thing that may be helpful. When they say hit rock bottom, people come to a place of tremendous distress and loss, where they literally feel everything is lost and hopeless. And when they come through that, they come to a certain indestructible state that's greater than people who don't have that sense of hopelessness, who never had that sense of hopelessness. It's basically like that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Or as an author once wrote in a book called Damage, that damaged people are very dangerous because they have nothing to lose. So when you get to a point where everything has been stripped from you, I'm just using a very extreme example, and you make it through that, nothing can kill you anymore because you've been to the worst. And you come to realize a certain truth that someone who's never gone through that type of fire will never realize. Now, I'm not wishing it upon anybody, and God forbid anyone has to come there. But there's something about losing it all that allows you to become all-powerful. And ultimately, in the language of Chassidus, is because it allows you to reach Atzmus. And everything higher than levels where there is more, where people are more have a sense of blessings and entitlement and have revealed blessings, will perhaps not experience that etzem quite that way. But just for the record, we also learned that tzaddikim, they can also, when Mashiach comes, will also acquire this measure of lasovet tzaddikai b'tiyufta. Mashiach will also teach them the level of etzem, even though they had more giluyim than etzem.
So this is why we have to bless Hashem for all that suffering? Is that?
As part of it, that's part of explaining it, yeah. It's not justifying it, by the way.
No, I know. And I would never want to do that, but I understand on that level.
It's not justifying, it's redeeming it. It's basically teaching us that we don't have answers, perhaps, but we get the strength that we've never been able to get.
I have a question. If he's talking about this and this thirst and this hunger that is happens in the Midbar of Kedusha, and these contemplations of Midbar de Kedusha that makes you really yearn for Atzmus. So, and you contrast that with the scenario of somebody hitting rock bottom, basically seeking out God from the lowest depths of human suffering, where there's also a depravity, a lack of anything meaningful. So it almost...
I see them as one here. I'm not sure why you separated. They come together.
I'm not. That's my question. That's Dafka my question.
That's exactly what he's saying. It comes together. If you read, he said, it comes min harichuk Dafka. It's coming from the rock bottom. It's coming from the rock bottom that creates this, from Midbar of L'umazeh, the darkness.
I'm saying a different question.
Midbar of Kedusha.
I'm saying, I hear you. I'm saying a different question. Someone who, let's say, lofty soul, and is feeling this lack of godliness in their life, doesn't mean that they have to have hit rock bottom in a sort of secular sense of some terrible, miserable suffering, depression, baseness, some addiction. Who knows? Something really bad that got them really low. This is saying you don't have to go there, because if you just are a holy soul, a spiritual soul, and you feel the lack of godliness, that's as if you're in the lowest of lows. I wonder if he's saying that too here.
Since there are many different types of people, and there are many situations, we can cover the whole spectrum. There are many scenarios. There's scenarios of people like David HaMelech, who said, if he didn't mean it figuratively. He was actually running for his life, and he was pursued by enemies, and he was threatened, and he was almost killed. So there's that level. If you're talking about a level of someone actually hitting rock bottom in the worst type of distress, there's that level. If you're asking me the question, what about somebody who's a tzaddik, and he has not experienced any distress in his life? Because does he reach this level? If you're asking that question, I'll answer that question. I don't know if that's your question. Here, he's talking here.
I am. I'm asking if he's
so that's a specific
argument.
question. Fine. So let me just first explain the Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis is talking about the whole picture. He's saying the neshamas as they are below say shcheira ani, I am dark because I am, like he says, I'm manifest in the body and the animal soul. Shemaylimim halamas v'estadim shemisalim ayidezeh er denefesh alikis. That's a general statement. Now, there are many levels of that. There are people who are terribly challenged by the animal soul in the worst possible ways. There are people who are challenged less. I mean, in Tanya, he talks about many levels of this. So the Rebbe Rashab is talking about all scenarios here. And all scenarios, there's always a measure of shcheirani, no matter, every soul will come down and dark. That's why the statement applies to all neshamas. You could ask the question, what about Moshe Rabbeinu? We said Moshe is a neshama of Atzilus. Even when he came down below, he's a neshama of Atzilus. Can he say shcheirani on Moshe Rabbeinu? Okay, it's a legitimate question. But overall, he's talking about the neshamas that come into biyah and assume the properties of biyah. He's not necessarily talking about per se Moshe Rabbeinu, even though Moshe also ended up dying in the wilderness and did not reach the 50th gate and did not witness Mashiach and he didn't go into the promised land. So there's also a shcheira by Moshe if you really want to get down to it. So it's just a matter of applying it each level. I'm disclaiming, basically what we're saying here is that the level of midbar, of shcheira, brings vinova. It brings the beauty of the deep thirst that comes dafka from lack and deprivation. Every person on their level, whatever that lack and deprivation may be. Then he adds now even more, and it's not matzmiach because that causes you, that catapults you to a level that's higher than smicha, and higher than adam, and higher, like he said, than giluyim, than revelation, to the point that the contemplation leads you to understand that even the highest levels, even when you were not deprived, even when everything was going beautifully, that also compared to etzem is a state of midbar. So this is a general sweeping statement on all levels. Then you can start breaking it down, each particular level. If you go back, I mentioned Lasovet Tzadikai B'tiyufta, the Rebbe Rashab already elaborated. What about Tzadikim? How do they come to that level of Helam Ha'atzmi? Since Helam Ha'atzmi is only reached through the Helam below, and they don't have Helam, relatively speaking. They don't have the Helam that a person who really goes to the lowest of the low, hits rock bottom, has. So he discussed that at length. I could refer you to the pages if you want. That was before 1350, probably around 1340-ish, around that area. I'll look it up later. So that's the general picture. As far as neshamas, like Moshe and these higher neshamas, so there's a few explanations given. Like, firstly, what I just said, they also need tshuva because till Mashiach comes, as a neshama klolis, they also have the pain of the generation. So even if they themselves may not have hit rock bottom, they carry the rock bottom of the generation within them because they are a part of it. That's number one. Number two, till Mashiach comes, everybody has subtly some form of helam, even the greatest neshamas. And then there's more to say on this topic. But it's not really going into here, as I said, dividing, separating. He did say more or less that Moshe and even the Ovis are really neshamas of Atzilus or Atzilus Shebebriya, and Shcheirani pretty much said that the neshamas below that are not like Moshe and Ovis. But you have to say that the Shcheirani probably goes on Moshe as well, even though, as again, he doesn't say it explicitly. And if you wish, you could also say that that's not what he says here. But I'm just talking in the broadest context. So that's more or less the picture as I understand.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, it says here that midbar is low mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, it's a higher than mitzvahs, because it's a key low adamhu midbar. So, but what about the Torah was given there? Dafkas Haman Torah was given in the midbar. We know a lot of the perushim is that it's available to everybody, and it's not one location. But according to this perush, what we're learning, why there are mitzvahs. I mean, the mitzvahs. You could say maybe there's less mitzvahs because when you enter Eretz Yisrael, you have so many more mitzvahs than you have in the midbar. But how do we understand that when it says it's low? There are no mitzvahs in midbar, and with Matan Torah happening dafka in the midbar.
First of all, he's not talking halachic here, saying that in the midbar there's no mitzvahs. If you go in a midbar, you're supposed to keep Shabbos and do mitzvahs in the midbar too. You're supposed to put on tefillin. So why don't you ask that question? Because midbar here is representing a state of consciousness. He's talking about coming to a state of thirst that is so deep that it's beyond the structure of mitzvahs. He's not talking about whether you're potter. He didn't say you're potter for mitzvahs in the midbar. That's not the case. Person is not absolved of mitzvahs. He's talking about the spiritual state of midbar is higher than the structure of mitzvahs. That's what he's talking about here.
And the second question is the Rebbe mentions one word. He says in order to dehine maybe the bechinas Simon zeh who he's bonus gamke bechinas midbar. One line, but it seems that that's the critical thing because we have all these nefesh alakis in the world that are not experiencing the Simon, like the Simon of being in a desert. They're in a desert, they're shchorani, but they're not experiencing, they have this no Simon at all. So the analogy...
I gave a whole talk about this last few classes back.
We
don't know how Simon manifests. I mean, Simon can manifest in many different ways. I mean...
Yeah, Eliezer, the Simon can manifest in terms of greed or ambition or drive for power, whatever. In other words, they're seeking out the transcendent in other ways. The different types of addiction, maybe not with drugs or alcohol or gambling, but a different type of addiction that takes them away from Elokus. They're seeking something transcendent. Rabbi Jacobson's talked about this a lot. So you could argue that their tzimon is being satisfied by other pursuits, but which are not obviously not godly per se, but they're still manifestations of someone who's thirsty.
Well said. Okay, I can understand that. That's one of the reasons, like how the Jewish people are so disproportionately high achievers in wealth and legal and medicine and all these higher pursuits, so to speak. Their ambition, the Simon for achievement.
Yeah, I think so.
Good point. So, but then and they have to understand that this ambition to be a billionaire, 25% of all the billionaires in the United States are Jewish. 25%. Think about that percentage. Where we only make up 3% of the population. But that ambition for achievement, or tzimon for achievement, is misplaced. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. We got to convey that. They need to he's boning in this. Understand that.
100%.
Okay.
I completely agree. I want to write a book that speaks to those people. I couldn't agree with you more.
Nice.
Those are the people I live with. These are the people I live with in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Silicon Valley. Well, we see what happened to their bank.
Yeah. First-hand experience here. Yeah. All that glitters is not gold.
Right. Okay. So we're going to stop here. End of the paragraph on page